The sun was just starting to warm the streets of what used to be a perfectly ordinary Tuesday morning. Birds chirped, traffic crawled, people shuffled towards coffee shops, their minds full of grocery lists and work emails, the usual stuff that fills a regular day. Kids laughed, chasing each other past a small bakery where the smell of fresh bread hung heavy in the air. Inside, someone wiped floury hands on an apron, humming along to the radio playing some old song. Life, messy and simple and completely human, was just happening. Then, the sky changed. It wasn't a cloud rolling in. It wasn't a plane. It was like someone had torn a hole right through the blue. A deep, unnatural purple light began to bleed through, spreading fast, swallowing the sun. People stopped, heads tilted back. Confusion turned to a cold prickle on the neck. And the radio hissed, then died. Phones flickered and went dark. A low hum started, not loud, but deep in the bones, making teeth vibrate. It wasn't scary at first, just wrong. Like the world had skipped a beat. Then the voices came. Not from speakers, but everywhere. Clear, cold, impossible to ignore, speaking perfect English but sounding utterly alien, like stones grinding together. People of Earth, your planet is now under the jurisdiction of the Galactic Concuil Imperium. Resistance is illogical. Compliance is mandatory. Prepare for integration. Silence. Thick, heavy silence. No birds, no traffic. Just that grinding hum and the echo of those words hanging in the air. People looked at each other, eyes wide, searching faces for an explanation, for someone to say it was a joke, a drill, anything. A woman clutching a grocery bag dropped it. Our cans rolled into the street. Nobody moved to pick them up. Before anyone could even whisper, "What does that mean?" the light intensified. The purple bled into something sharper, brighter, almost white-hot. It wasn't coming from one spot. It was everywhere above the city, a vast, impossible ceiling of energy pressing down. The humming rose to a shriek that made eardrums ache. People clapped hands over their ears, mouths open in silent screams. And then, the beams. Not lasers like in the movies. These were columns of pure, silent light, wider than city blocks, dropping straight down from that impossible ceiling. They didn't burn, they didn't explode, they just erased. Where the light touched, buildings didn't crumble. They simply ceased to exist. One moment, a tall office tower stood silhouetted against the purple sky. The next, and it was just gone. No rubble, no smoke, just empty space where solid stone and steel had been. Parks vanished, streets disappeared, entire neighborhoods blinked out of existence like they were never there. The silence was the worst part. No crash, no roar, just a terrible, absolute nothingness where life had been. People standing near the edge of a beam's touch didn't scream long. 1 second they were frozen in horror, the next, nothing. Like a photo torn in half. Panic didn't explode. It oozed. It started as a low moan from the crowd, a collective gasp that turned into a rising tide of pure animal fear. People didn't run away at first. There was nowhere to run. The beams were falling everywhere. They ran anywhere, stumbling over each other, shoving, falling. A man tripped, his glasses flying off, and a dozen hands grabbed him. He pulled him up, pushed him forward, not out of kindness, but sheer, desperate momentum. Survival instinct overriding everything else. Down near the river, where the park used to be, a soldier in fatigue stood frozen, rifle hanging loosely at his side. He'd been on routine patrol, bored, thinking about lunch. Now he stared at the spot where the children's playground had been 5 seconds ago, just smooth, empty ground. His mouth worked, but no sound came out. His hands shook. He wasn't a hero in that moment. He was just a young person, utterly broken by what his eyes were refusing to believe. He dropped to his knees, not in prayer, but because his legs wouldn't hold him. The rifle clattered on the pavement. In the bakery, the flour-covered person didn't run. They stood rooted behind the counter, staring out the window as the beam touched the edge of the building across the street. The familiar cafe sign, Maggie's mug, vanished. The warm glow of the interior lights, the people sitting at the tables, gone, erased. A small choked sound escaped their throat. They turned, saw the terrified face of a customer huddled near the ovens, and without thinking, grabbed a loaf of still warm bread and a bottle of water, shoving them into the person's arms. "Go!" they rasped, voice raw. "Just go!" They didn't follow. They just stood there, looking at the empty space where their street used to be, the smell of baking bread suddenly obscene against the backdrop of nothingness. A child, maybe 6 years old, stood alone in the middle of the deserted road, small hands clutching a half-melted ice cream cone. They weren't crying, and they just stared up at the purple sky, eyes huge and unblinking. Their bright red shoes looked absurdly cheerful against the gray asphalt. A woman in a blue headscarf running past skidded to a stop. She didn't know the child. She didn't hesitate. She scooped them up, ice cream and all, holding them tight against her chest as she ran, her own breath coming in ragged sobs. The child buried their face in her shoulder, silent, the only sound the frantic pounding of two hearts. The beams stopped as suddenly as they began. The purple light faded, leaving the sky a sickly, bruised yellow. The grinding hum died, replaced by a ringing silence so profound it felt like pressure in the head. Then slowly, the real noise started. Not screams, not yet. A low, continuous wail of disbelief and grief rising from the scattered survivors. And the sound of coughing, dust, but also the choking horror of what they'd witnessed. The sharp crack of a single car alarm finally giving up the ghost. People stood in the ruins of what wasn't ruins. There was no rubble to climb over, no fire to escape, just gaps. Huge, clean gaps where whole sections of the city had been. You could see clear across the river now to parts of the city that were still standing, looking strangely intact from a distance, but you knew the beams had touched them too. The scale was impossible to grasp. One moment, millions of lives humming along. The next, silence where they used to be. The air smelled wrong. Not smoke, but ozone and something metallic, like the air after a massive lightning strike, but colder. A small group huddled near a miraculously intact bus stop, and hands trembled as they passed around a single water bottle. No one spoke. What was there to say? A man kept muttering, "My wife. She was at the clinic." Over and over, staring at his empty hands. An older woman sat on the curb, rocking slightly, her eyes fixed on a single, lonely sneaker lying in the middle of the road, the only trace of someone. Someone finally broke the silence, their voice hoarse and shaky. The news? Anyone? Phones?" A dozen people fumbled with dead devices, shaking them, pressing buttons with desperate hope. Nothing, just dark screens. The isolation hit them then, deeper than the fear. They were utterly alone in this. No help coming, no explanation. Just the vast, empty spaces where their world used to be. A soldier, not the one by the river, finally moved. He stumbled towards the group, his uniform torn, the face streaked with grime and something that might have been tears. He didn't look like an authority figure anymore. He looked lost. "Command! Command is gone," he stammered, his voice cracking. "All channels, dead air, just static, and that voice, it said—" He couldn't finish. He just shook his head, looking out at the impossible gaps in the cityscape, his shoulders slumping. The sun, weak and yellow through the strange haze, cast long, distorted shadows across the empty spaces. It illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. It showed the sheer clean edges where buildings had simply ended. It showed the faces of the survivors, pale, hollow-eyed, covered in a fine gray powder that wasn't ash. They weren't thinking about billions yet. They couldn't. Their minds were too small for that number. Well, they were thinking about the missing face at the breakfast table, the friend who didn't answer their call, the familiar street corner that was just gone. The horror wasn't abstract. It was the cold spot next to them on the bus stop bench, the empty chair at the imagined kitchen table. A small voice, the child from the road, finally spoke, muffled against the woman's shoulder. "Where's my ice cream?" The woman held them tighter, tears streaming silently down her face. She looked at the group, her eyes searching for an answer she knew didn't exist. It's gone, sweetheart," she whispered, her voice barely audible. Just like everything else." Nobody corrected her. Nobody offered false hope. They just stood there, in the unnatural quiet, holding on to each other, staring into the clean and terrifying emptiness where their ordinary Tuesday morning used to be. The sky was clear again, but it felt like the deepest, coldest night. The wrath had been unleashed, and the terrifying truth was just beginning to sink in. This wasn't the end. It was only the first part, and nobody knew what came next. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was the sound of a world holding its breath, waiting for the next beam to fall. 1,198 words. The dust settled like gray snow, but it wasn't snow. It coated throats, stung eyes, and made every cough feel like swallowing sand. The silence after the beams stopped wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, thick with the weight of what was missing. People stood frozen, staring at the clean, impossible gaps where buildings, streets, and lives had been. No rubble, no fires, just empty space. It had felt like the world had taken a bite out of itself and left a perfect, smooth hole. A low moan started somewhere, a sound of pure animal loss. Then another joined it, then another. It wasn't loud, but it spread through the scattered groups like a cold wind. People weren't screaming yet. They were too stunned, too busy trying to understand the sheer wrongness of it all. One moment, the city hummed with life, the buzz of traffic, the chatter of people, the distant siren of an ambulance. Now, nothing but that awful moan, the occasional dry cough and the frantic thudding of hearts against ribs. Near the broken edge of what used to be a main road, the baker stood. Flour still dusted their arms, their aprons stained dark where sweat had mixed with the gray powder in the air. They weren't thinking about the bakery anymore, and they were staring at the gap where the children's hospital wing had stood just hours before. They'd delivered bread there every Tuesday, smiled at the nurses, seen kids with bandaged arms waving from windows. Now, just smooth, empty ground. A single tiny blue sneaker lay near the edge of the nothingness. The baker picked it up, their hands shaking. They held it tight, like it was the only real thing left. A young soldier, maybe 19, stumbled into the group huddled near the bus stop. His uniform was torn, his face smudged with grime and something wet that wasn't rain. He looked around wildly, his eyes wide with a fear that wasn't just for himself. "They're gone," he rasped, his voice cracking. "All gone. Command, radio, nothing but static and that voice." He dropped to his knees, not in prayer, but because his legs wouldn't hold him. It said we were illogical, that we needed to comply. He looked up, his eyes searching the faces around him. "What does that mean? How do you comply with that?" His voice broke on the last word. Nobody had an answer. They just looked at each other, the question hanging in the poisoned air. Someone started checking for injuries. Not dramatic wounds, but the small, human things. A cut on a forehead from falling. A sprained wrist from tripping in the panic. A child's scraped knee. A woman with kind eyes and hands that moved with calm purpose tore strips from her clean scarf to bind the cuts. She didn't speak much, just handed out water from a miraculously unbroken bottle. Her touch gentle. In the middle of the impossible, this small act of care felt like a lifeline. These people watched her, drawn to the quiet rhythm of helping. A man with a deep scratch on his cheek accepted the water, his hand trembling. "Thank you," he whispered, the words thick. She just nodded, her own eyes red-rimmed but steady. It wasn't much, but it was something human left. The sun climbed higher, weak and yellow through the strange haze. It cast long shadows across the gaps, making the emptiness feel even deeper. People started moving, not with purpose, but with a desperate need to do something, to see, to understand. Small groups wandered towards the edges of the erased zones, drawn like moths to the terrifying void. They stopped a few feet back, staring into the nothingness. One woman reached out a shaking hand, stopping just short of the clean line where asphalt ended, and nothing began. She pulled her hand back fast, and as if burned by the emptiness itself. "Where did they go?" a man muttered, his voice raw. He was looking at the spot where his apartment building should have been. "Did they disappear, or—" He couldn't finish. The thought was too big, too sharp. Another person, an older man leaning on a bent cane, spoke quietly, his voice surprisingly calm. "Gone is gone," he said, staring into the void. "Like my wife, 10 years back. One moment here, the next, just space where she was." He tapped his chest. "The ache is the same, just bigger." His words landed heavy on everyone. It wasn't about billions. It was about the single, crushing ache for the one person you lost, the missing chair at your table, the voice that wouldn't call your name again. Thirst became a sharp, insistent thing. Water bottles were passed around, each sip measured, and shared without being asked. Someone found a dented thermos of cold tea near the bus stop. It was warm, sweet, and smelled faintly of mint. They offered it to the woman holding the child. The child took a small sip, then looked up, their eyes huge. "My ice cream melted," they whispered. The woman held them tighter. "I know, sweetheart," she murmured, her voice thick. "I know." She looked out at the empty space, her own tears cutting clean tracks through the dust on her face. The simple grief of a lost ice cream cone in the middle of unimaginable loss somehow made it all feel more real, more human. Then, the radio crackled. Not from a building, not from a car. It came from the soldier's discarded radio, lying in the dirt where he'd dropped it. A burst of static, harsh and sudden, made everyone jump. Then, cutting through the noise, and that same grinding stone-on-stone voice. "Compliance window opens in 12 Earth cycles. Designated assembly points will activate. Resistance triggers immediate neutralization. Prepare for integration." The silence that followed was different, colder, sharper. The moaning stopped. People froze, eyes darting to the radio, then to each other, then to the vast emptiness around them. 12 hours. The number hung in the air like a death sentence. Assembly points. Neutralization. The words were cold, clinical, and utterly terrifying. What did they want? What was integration? The fear wasn't just about dying anymore. It was about what might happen before they died. Or worse, after. Panic, held at bay by shock, finally surged. Not the wild, running kind. A quieter, more desperate kind. People started grabbing anything useful. A half-full water bottle, a packet of crackers from someone's bag, a clean t-shirt for bandages. The baker, still holding the tiny blue sneaker, moved towards the group. They pulled a slightly charred loaf of bread from their bag, the last thing they'd grabbed from the bakery. Without a word, they broke it into small pieces and started handing it out. "Eat," they said, their voice rough but firm. "We need strength." It wasn't much. Just dry, hard bread, but taking that small piece, feeling its rough texture, smelling the faint, familiar yeast. It was a tiny anchor to the world that was. People ate slowly, silently, the simple act feeling like defiance. The soldier pushed himself up, wiping his face with a dirty sleeve. He looked at the radio, then at the baker sharing the bread. Not a flicker of something other than fear came into his eyes. Purpose? Maybe just the need to do something. "We need to find others," he said, his voice stronger now. "Groups. Safety in numbers. Maybe we can figure out where these assembly points are." He looked around, meeting eyes. "We can't just wait here." It wasn't a plan. It was barely a thought. But it was movement. It was not giving up. As the weak sun started its slow slide towards the horizon, painting the hazy sky in bruised oranges and purples, the small group began to move. Not running, not shouting, just walking slowly, carefully, towards the edge of the known city, away from the deepest gaps. They stuck close together, shoulders brushing, hands occasionally reaching out to steady someone on uneven ground. The baker walked near the front, and the small blue sneaker tucked carefully into their apron pocket. The woman held the child close, their small body a warm weight against her own fear. They passed places that were still standing, but felt utterly alien. A street sign hung crookedly, Maple Street. But Maple Street ended abruptly 50 feet ahead, cut off by the smooth, terrifying edge of nothing. A single porch light flickered on in a house, casting a weak yellow circle on a patch of grass that now looked out over emptiness. It felt like walking through a dream where the rules had changed, and nobody had given you the new ones. The low hum started again. Not loud, not from the sky this time. It seemed to come from the ground itself, a deep vibration felt in the chest more than heard. People stopped, listening, hearts pounding. It wasn't the shriek of the beams. This was different, steadier, like a giant engine turning over, waiting. They looked at each other, the unspoken question clear in every face. Is this it? Is it starting again? The soldier gripped his empty rifle tighter. The baker's hand closed over the sneaker in their pocket. The woman pulled the child closer, burying their face in her neck. The hum didn't get louder. It didn't get quieter. It just persisted. A constant, unsettling thrum beneath their feet, a reminder that the silence wasn't safe, and the wrath they'd seen was only the beginning. They stood there, a small knot of humans on the edge of oblivion, the taste of dry bread still in their mouths, the dust of their erased world coating their skin, listening to the earth itself vibrate with the promise of what came next. 12 hours. The clock had started ticking, and there was nowhere left to hide. 1,197 words. The humming in the ground didn't stop. It just settled in, like a bad toothache you learn to live with, but deeper, vibrating right up through your bones. It wasn't loud, but it was everywhere, a constant, low thrum that made it hard to think straight. People walking with the small group kept stumbling, not from the broken ground, though there was plenty of that, but because the vibration messed with their balance. It felt like the whole world was holding its breath, waiting for the next shoe to drop. The weak sun dipped lower, painting the sky in angry oranges and purples that looked wrong against the gray dust still hanging in the air. The group moved slowly, sticking close together like scared animals. Every shadow felt dangerous, and every flicker of a broken streetlight made hearts jump. They weren't running to anything, really, just away from the big, clean holes in the city, away from the silence where life used to be. The baker walked near the front, one hand unconsciously rubbing the tiny blue sneaker tucked deep in their apron pocket. The other hand held a half-eaten piece of the hard, charred bread. They kept breaking off tiny bits, not because they were hungry, but because the rough texture in their fingers felt real. It was a small anchor against the madness swirling inside their head. The hospital wing, gone. Just like that. The thought came again, sharp and sudden, making them stumble. Someone's hand shot out, steadying their elbow. No words, just the touch. It was enough. The young soldier walked a few paces ahead, and scanning the broken streets with eyes that looked 10 years older than his face. His rifle was still empty, but he held it tight, knuckles white. He kept glancing at the cracked face of his watch. 11 hours and 40 minutes. The number burned in his mind. Assembly points. What did that even mean? Were they supposed to just line up and wait to be... what? Integrated? The word felt cold and slimy. He kicked a loose chunk of concrete, sending up a small puff of gray dust. It felt useless, pointless. But the kick helped a little. Near the back, the woman held the child close. The child's small body was warm against her chest, their breathing slow and deep. Asleep, finally. A small miracle. The woman's own eyes were gritty with exhaustion and unshed tears, but she kept walking. She focused on the simple rhythm, one foot, then the other. Breathe in. Breathe out. She watched the baker's back, the steady movement of their shoulders. It was something to follow, something human. She saw the baker pause, look down at the ground near a miraculously intact mailbox. They bent slowly, stiffly, and picked up a single mud-splattered photograph. A family, smiling, standing in front of a house that was probably just empty space now. The baker held it for a long moment, their face unreadable, then carefully tucked it inside their apron next to the sneaker. A small act of keeping, of remembering. They passed through a neighborhood that felt eerily quiet, but mostly whole. Houses stood, windows broken, doors hanging open. But no people, no sounds of life. Just that constant bone-deep hum. It was worse than the gaps. The gaps were shocking, brutal. This felt like walking through a tomb. A porch swing creaked softly in a non-existent breeze. A single toy truck lay abandoned in the middle of the street. The silence pressed in, heavy and suffocating. Then, a sound cut through the hum. Faint at first, then clearer. Music. Old, scratchy music, like from a radio left on too loud in a kitchen. A slow, sad blues song drifted out from a house with a crooked "for sale" sign still stuck in the front yard. The group stopped, frozen. Music meant people. Living, breathing people who weren't just running or hiding. Hope, sharp and sudden, flared in tired eyes. The soldier raised a hand, signaling caution. He moved slowly towards the house, the group following a few paces behind, hearts pounding louder than the hum. The front door was slightly ajar. He pushed it open gently, rifle ready. Inside wasn't a trap. It was life. Sort of. An older man sat in a worn armchair facing a large, old-fashioned radio. The music poured out, filling the small, cluttered living room. Dust coated everything, but the room felt lived in. Candles flickered on side tables, casting long, dancing shadows. The man didn't turn around. He just sat, staring out the window at the darkening sky, a single tear tracing a clean line down his dusty cheek. His hands rested on his knees, one tapping slowly, almost unconsciously, to the beat of the music. "Sir?" the soldier asked softly, lowering his rifle slightly. "Are you okay?" The man didn't jump. He just sighed, a long, slow sound that seemed to come from his toes. "Okay," he repeated, his voice rough but calm. "Son, La OK left the station about the time the sky turned purple." He finally turned his head. His eyes were old and tired, but clear. "Name's Ben. Come on in. Shut the door. Draft's colder than a well-digger's lunch out there." He gestured vaguely with his chin towards a few rickety chairs. "Music's the only thing keeping the quiet from eating me alive." They filed in, the tension easing just a fraction in the warm, candle-lit space. The smell of dust and old paper was almost comforting. Someone lit more candles. The woman sat with the sleeping child on her lap. The baker pulled out the last of the bread, broke it into pieces, and offered it around. Ben watched them, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. "Flour on your hands, friend. You a baker?" The baker nodded, handing Ben a piece of bread. "Was." Ben took it, nibbled slowly. Good bread's hard to find these days. Even harder to make. He looked at the group, his gaze taking in the dust, the fear, the exhaustion. "You're heading towards the river road, I reckon?" The soldier nodded. "We heard assembly points might be there, before the beams hit." Ben snorted, a dry, humorless sound. "Heard the same on the radio static, before it mostly died." He tapped the old radio. "This old girl picks up bits and pieces, mostly that voice, telling us where to go, like cattle." He looked out the window again, towards the direction of the river. "But I heard something else too, before the static got bad. Whispers, from people who saw it." "What?" the woman asked, her voice barely a whisper, tightening her arms around the child. "Big lights," Ben said quietly. "Not the beam lights. Different. Glowing platforms. Popping up near the old docks, where the river bends. People who got close, they just walked onto them, vanished." He looked back at the group, his eyes serious. Didn't look like they were forced. Looked calm. Too calm. A chill that had nothing to do with the draft ran through the room. Voluntary. The idea was almost worse than being dragged. What could make someone just walk into nothingness? "Why?" the baker asked, the words scraping out. "Why would they do that?" Ben shrugged, a small, helpless movement. "Fear? Hope? Maybe that voice. It does something. Makes you want to go. Makes you think it's the only way to stop the hurting." He looked down at his hands. "Heard one man on the radio. Sounded broken. Said it promised his little girl was safe. On the other side. Said he had to go find her." Ben's voice cracked. You see that look in someone's eyes. You know they're already gone." The music on the radio shifted to a slow, mournful saxophone solo. It filled the silence left by Ben's words. The weight of it settled on everyone. The promise of safety, even a false one, was a powerful drug when you were drowning. The soldier stood up abruptly, pacing the small space. "We can't just walk onto some glowing platform. We don't know what it is, what integration means." He slammed his fist softly against the wall, sending up a puff of dust. "It could be death, or worse." "Maybe," Ben said calmly, pouring water from a dented kettle into a few chipped mugs. He handed them around. "Or maybe it's the only door left standing. You got a better plan, son? Hide in the rubble till the next beam falls?" He took a slow sip of water. 12 hours is almost 11. That clock's ticking louder than this hum." He was right. The impossible choice loomed: face the unknown horror of the assembly point, or wait here for the Imperium to decide you'd resisted. The safe, warm room suddenly felt like a trap. The music, once a comfort, now felt like a siren song. They stayed only a little longer, sharing the water and the last crumbs of bread in silence, the saxophone wailing in the background. Ben didn't try to stop them when they stood to leave. He just nodded, his eyes sad. "Good luck," he said, the words heavy. "Wherever you're headed." He turned back to the window, to the darkening sky, and the music played on. Stepping back out into the dust-choked street felt like stepping into a freezer. The humming in the ground seemed louder now, colder. The group stood for a moment on Ben's porch, looking towards the river road, the direction of the assembly points, the direction of the vanishing platforms. The baker looked down at their dusty hands, then at the sleeping child in the woman's arms. They thought of the tiny blue sneaker, the photograph of the smiling family. They thought of the warm bread ovens, the smell of yeast, the simple act of feeding people. Was that all just erased? Or was it still in here? They touched their chest, where the sneaker and photo rested against their heart. The soldier checked his watch again. 10 hours and 50 minutes. He took a deep breath, the dust scraping his throat. "We need to see it," he said, his voice low but firm. "We need to know what we're facing before we decide." Nobody argued. What was the point of hiding if you didn't know what you were hiding from? They started walking again towards the river bend, towards the rumored lights. Not with hope, exactly, but with a grim determination to see, to understand the face of the thing that had shattered their world. The weak moon rose, casting long, distorted shadows across the broken streets. The humming vibrated up through their boots. In the distance, past the skeletal remains of bridges, a faint, unnatural glow began to pulse on the horizon. Steady, waiting, like a heartbeat from another world. It wasn't fire, it wasn't city lights. It was something new, something alien, calling them in. They walked towards the glow, a small knot of humans moving through the ruins of their ordinary lives, carrying only their fear, their grief, the crumbs of hard bread, and the stubborn, fragile spark of wanting to know why. The clock ticked, and the hum thrummed, and the light on the horizon pulsed, steady and cold, like the eye of the storm they were walking straight into. 1,199 words. The walk toward the river felt longer than it should have. Every step kicked up little puffs of that gray dust, coating tongues and making throats burn. The humming in the ground didn't get louder, but it changed. It wasn't just a vibration anymore. It felt like it was pulling, like the earth itself was leaning toward the river, toward that faint, pulsing glow on the horizon. People stumbled more, not from tired legs, but because the ground seemed to tilt slightly underfoot, tugging them forward. The baker kept a hand pressed against their chest, where the tiny blue sneaker and the mud-splattered photograph were tucked inside the apron. The rough fabric felt like the only solid thing left. And they focused on the feel of it, the stitching, the crumbs of hard bread caught in the folds. One foot, then the other. Feel the ground, feel the sneaker. It was a small chant against the roaring fear in their head. The image of the children's hospital wing, the smell of baking bread back home, the sound of kids laughing near the bakery door, all gone. Just smooth, empty space. The ache was a physical thing, right under their ribs. The young soldier walked a few paces ahead, his empty rifle held tight. He kept checking his watch, the cracked face catching the weak moonlight. 9 hours and 20 minutes. The number was a stone in his gut. He scanned the broken streets, not just for danger, but for anything familiar. A street sign, a shop window, anything to prove the world hadn't completely flipped upside down. But the landmarks were wrong. A familiar coffee shop sign hung crookedly over a gaping hole where the building used to be. The street he knew turned left here, but now it just ended, dropping off into nothingness. It made his head spin. He rubbed his temples, trying to push back the dizziness. Focus. Just get to the river, see what's there. Near the back, the woman held the child close. The child was awake now, small fingers clutching the fabric of her shirt, eyes wide and watchful. They hadn't cried since the ice cream melted, just watched, absorbed. The woman felt the weight of that silent observation. She hummed a little tune, something wordless and old, more for herself than the child. It was a thread connecting her to the woman she was before, the one who sang lullabies in a safe room, not while walking toward a pulsing alien light. She looked at the baker's back, the steady movement. "Hold on to that," she told herself. "Hold on to the baker." As they got closer to the river bend, the air changed. The dust thinned, replaced by a damp, cold smell, river water, and wet stone. But underneath it, something else. Sharp, metallic, like blood, but cleaner, colder. It made their noses sting. The humming deepened, vibrating up through their boots, rattling teeth. It wasn't just in the ground now, it was in the air, in their chests, a constant pressure behind the eyes. Then they saw it. Not just a glow, a presence. 3 massive platforms hovered just above the riverbank where the old docks used to be. They weren't made of metal or light like anything on Earth. They looked like solidified shadow, but shot through with veins of that same cold, a purple-white light that had torn the sky earlier. The light pulsed slowly, rhythmically, like a heartbeat. Thum, thum, thum. With each pulse, the humming in the ground swelled, pressing in on them. People were already there, not running, not screaming, just walking. Slowly, calmly, toward the nearest platform. Men, women, older people, even a few kids holding hands. They moved in a loose line, like they were waiting for a bus on a quiet morning. Their faces weren't scared. They were blank, empty, like the worry had been wiped clean away, leaving only a strange, unsettling calm. They didn't look at each other. They didn't look back. They just walked toward the pulsing shadow platform, step after step, until they reached the edge. Then, without breaking stride, without a sound, they stepped onto the darkness and vanished. Just gone. And like turning off a light. The group froze, hidden behind the crumbling brick wall of what used to be a warehouse. They pressed themselves flat, hearts hammering against stone. The sight of those calm, empty faces walking willingly into nothingness was somehow worse than the beams. It felt like a theft, a stealing of will. The soldier's knuckles were white on his rifle. His breath came fast and shallow. "See?" he whispered, voice tight with horror. "That's what they want. Just walk in, like sheep, like we're nothing." He looked at the baker, eyes burning. That's integration? Becoming that? Empty? Gone? The baker couldn't look away from the line of people. They saw a woman in a faded floral dress, walking steadily. She held a small, worn teddy bear. Just like the sneaker, the baker thought, their chest tightening. Nay, the woman didn't glance at the bear, didn't hug it. Just held it loosely, her eyes fixed straight ahead on the pulsing platform. One step, then another. Onto the shadow. Gone. The baker's hand flew to their apron pocket, clutching the tiny blue sneaker like a lifeline. No. Not like that. Please. Not like that. The woman holding the child felt the small body tense. The child's eyes were huge, fixed on the vanishing people. A tiny hand reached out, pointing. "They go bye-bye," the child whispered, their voice small and clear in the tense silence. The woman pulled them closer, burying their face in her neck. "Shh, sweetheart, it's okay." But the lie tasted like ash. It wasn't okay. Nothing was okay. She looked at the soldier, then the baker. "We can't go there," she breathed, the words barely audible. We can't." A low murmur started among the small group huddled behind the wall. Fear, confusion, the desperate need to do something. One man, his face streaked with dust and tears, turned to the soldier. "What do we do? Hide? Wait for the next beam? Or just walk in like they are?" His voice cracked. "Is there even a choice?" The soldier looked from the man to the vanishing line, then down at his empty rifle. The useless piece of metal felt heavy in his hands. He thought of Ben, the old man with the radio, saying, "You got a better plan? Hide in the rubble?" He thought of the voice on the radio. "Resistance triggers immediate neutralization." Was this the only door left? A door that led to becoming empty? The baker finally tore their eyes from the platform. They looked at the group, their face pale but steady under the dust. When they pulled the tiny blue sneaker from their pocket, not to show it, but to hold it, to feel its small, solid shape. "Look," they said, their voice rough but surprisingly strong. They held up the sneaker, then the photograph of the smiling family. "This is real. We are real. What's happening out there?" They gestured toward the platform, the calm, empty walkers. That's not us. That's what they want to make us. Wiped clean. Forgotten. They tucked the sneaker and photo back inside, close to their heart. We keep this, they said, tapping their chest. The bread, the ice cream, the worry, the ache. That's what's left. That's what matters. Not walking into the shadow. The words hung in the cold, metallic air, simple, human, not about fighting armies or understanding alien tech, about holding on to the small, messy, painful things that made them them. The soldier looked at the baker. He saw the flour still dusting their arms, the tear tracks cutting through the grime on their cheeks. He saw the fierce grip on their apron where the sneaker was hidden. He saw the humanity the baker was clinging to. It wasn't a plan for survival. It was a reason to try. He lowered his rifle, not in surrender, but in understanding. He met the baker's eyes, nodded slowly. Okay, he said, the word thick. Okay, we hold on to it. He turned to the group, his voice firmer now. We don't go to the platform. We find a place to hide, not to wait for the end. To watch, to understand how they do it, how they take the fear away, and leave nothing. He looked toward the river, not at the platform, but at the broken warehouses, the tangled wreckage of the old docks. Somewhere dark, somewhere quiet. We watched them. A flicker of something besides terror lit up in the group's eyes. Purpose. Small, fragile, but real. They weren't just running from something anymore. They were moving toward understanding. They slipped away from the wall, melting into the deeper shadows of the ruined warehouse district, moving parallel to the river, but staying well back from the open bank where the platforms pulsed. Every instinct screamed to run away from that light, that hum, that terrifying calm. But they moved toward it, cautiously, using the rubble for cover, driven by a desperate need to see how the emptiness happened. They found a spot, the collapsed basement of a storage building, half buried under fallen beams, entrance hidden by a tangle of metal pipes. It was dark, damp, and smelled of mildew and river mud. Perfect. They squeezed inside, one by one, huddling together on the cold, gritty floor. The humming was muffled here, but still present, a low thrum in the bones. The pulsing light from the platforms cast faint, shifting shadows through cracks in the debris above. The soldier took first watch, peering through a narrow gap in the pipes. The woman held the child, who finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, thumb in mouth. The baker sat nearby, silently breaking the last piece of hard bread into tiny fragments, passing them around without a word. The small act of sharing felt like a quiet rebellion. Outside, the line of calm walkers continued. Step, step, onto the shadow. Gone. The purple-white light pulsed. Thoom, thoom, thoom. The hum vibrated through the earth, through the pipes, through the floor where they sat. It wasn't just sound anymore, and it felt like a voice. A slow, deep, wordless pull inside their heads. A whisper that said, come, be calm, be empty. No more pain. The baker closed their eyes, pressing the sneaker tight against their chest. They focused on the rough stitching, on the memory of flour on their hands, on the ache for the missing voices. This is real. This is me. The pull was strong, cold, promising an end to the fear. But the ache, the messy, painful ache, that was them. The soldier watched the platform, his jaw clenched. He saw a man in a torn work shirt step onto the shadow. No hesitation, just gone. The soldier's hand tightened on his empty rifle, not to fight the platform, but to remind himself what he was fighting for. The right to feel the fear, the right to the ache. 9 hours and 5 minutes ticked by on his watch. The hum deepened. The pull grew stronger in the silence of the hiding place. Outside, the light pulsed. Thoom, 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 calling, waiting. The calm walkers kept coming. The group huddled closer in the dark, holding on to crumbs of bread, tiny sneakers, and the fragile, terrifying warmth of being human in a world that wanted them erased. The real battle wasn't outside. It was right here, in the quiet dark, fighting the pull of the easy end. Fighting to keep the ache alive. 1,198 words. The hum wasn't just in the ground anymore. It was inside their skulls. A low, steady thrum, thrum, thrum that vibrated their teeth, made their vision blur at the edges. In the dark basement hideout, huddled under fallen beams and river mud, it felt like the whole world was pressing in. The pulsing light from the platforms outside cast long and shifting shadows through the cracks overhead, cold purple-white fingers reaching for them. Thum, thum, thum. Each pulse sent a fresh wave of that awful calm washing over the group. The kind of calm that promised no more fear, no more ache, just nothing. The child stirred in the woman's arms, whimpering softly in their sleep. The woman held them tighter, rocking slowly, humming that same wordless tune. But her own hands trembled. She could feel it, the pull. Not a physical force, but something deeper. A whisper in the back of her mind. Let go. Stop fighting. Step onto the light. No more worry for the little one. No more empty spaces where home used to be. It was so tempting, like sinking into a warm bath after a lifetime of cold. She pressed her cheek against the child's soft hair, breathing in the familiar smell of dust and sleep. And this, she thought fiercely, this warmth, this worry, this is real. She focused on the small, frantic heartbeat against her chest, not the calm, not the nothing. Nearby, the baker sat with their back against the gritty wall, eyes squeezed shut. One hand clamped over their apron pocket, where the tiny blue sneaker and the photograph lay. The other hand slowly, deliberately, broke a tiny crumb of the last hard bread between their fingers. They didn't eat it. They just felt the rough texture, the dryness. Flour on my hands, they thought, the memory sharp. The smell of rising dough. The sound of the oven door clicking shut. The alien hum pushed against these memories, trying to smother them, replace them with that smooth, empty silence. Thum. It whispered, forget the hospital wing, forget the bread, forget the ache, it's easier. And the baker dug their nails into their palm. The sharp sting of pain was a lifeline. This hurt is mine. This memory is mine. I won't let it go. The young soldier crouched by the narrow gap in the pipes, peering out. His empty rifle lay across his knees. Outside, the line of calm walkers still moved toward the shadow platform. Step, step, onto the darkness. Gone. He saw a woman in a torn sweater, eyes vacant, step off the edge without a pause. Just vanished. His stomach clenched. That could be me in an hour, he thought, cold sweat prickling his neck. The hum swelled, a wave of cold certainty flooding his mind. Resistance is illogical. Compliance is peace. For a terrifying second, the fear did vanish. The crushing weight of responsibility lifted. It felt light, effortless, like floating. He could just stand up, walk out. I step onto the light. No more watching, no more failing, just quiet. He squeezed his eyes shut, fighting the tide. Then he felt it, a small, rough piece of bread pressed into his hand. He opened his eyes. The baker stood beside him, silent, their face pale but steady in the dim light. No words, just the shared crumb, the silent reminder. This is real. This is us. The soldier looked down at the dry fragment. He remembered the baker breaking bread for strangers hours ago, the simple act of sharing when the world ended. He closed his fist around the crumb, the rough edges biting into his skin. The floating feeling shattered. The fear rushed back, sharp, painful, human. He met the baker's eyes and gave a single slow nod. Not yet. The humming deepened, became a physical pressure in the chest. Thoom, thoom, thoom. The light outside flared brighter, casting harsh, jumping shadows. People in the group started to shift. A man near the back let out a soft sigh, his shoulders slumping. His eyes glazed over, fixed on the pulsing light filtering through the cracks. He stood up slowly, as if in a dream, one foot in front of the other, moving toward the gap where the soldier watched. "No!" The woman's voice, sharp and raw, cut through the hum. She didn't let go of the child, but she called out, her voice trembling but clear. "Wait! Remember the ice cream?" She looked at the man, her eyes wide with desperate urgency. "The melted ice cream, the red shoes, it was silly, it was yours." She held the child up slightly, their small, sleepy face turned toward the man. "He cried when it melted. It was real." The man paused halfway to the gap. He blinked slowly, like someone surfacing from deep water. His gaze flickered from the pulsing light to the child's face. A single tear traced a clean line through the dust on his cheek. He didn't speak, but he didn't move toward the gap either. He sank back down, pulling his knees to his chest, burying his face in his arms. A low, shuddering sob escaped him. Not the calm silence of the platform walkers, but the raw, messy sound of someone clinging to their pain. The ache is the proof, the baker thought, watching him. Proof we're still here. Dawn was coming, not the warm, hopeful kind. A sickly pale light seeped through the cracks, washing the purple pulse of the platforms with a dull gray. The humming didn't stop, but it changed. Became expectant. Thoom, thoom, thoom. Like a heartbeat speeding up. See, the line of walkers seemed to grow longer, moving with a new urgency toward the platforms. Step, step, gone. The soldier checked his watch. The cracked face showed 3:07 a.m. The 12-hour window was almost closed. What happened when it ended? Resistance triggers immediate neutralization. The words echoed, colder than the river air. They couldn't stay hidden forever. The platforms were too close. The pull was too strong. The baker moved quietly through the huddled group. They didn't speak. They just placed small, rough crumbs of bread into each person's hand. A shared peace, a silent pact. We are here. We feel this. They stopped beside the man who had almost walked out. He was still curled up, shaking. The baker knelt, placed a crumb in his trembling hand, and covered it gently with their own dusty fingers. He didn't look up, but his hand closed slowly around the crumb. A tiny connection, a thread holding him back from the edge. Outside, the light pulsed faster. Thoom, thoom, thoom. The hum vibrated, the dust motes dancing in the pale dawn light. It felt like the air itself was tightening, preparing to snap. Then a new sound cut through the thrumming silence. Not a beam, not the grinding voice, a single, clear note, a whistle, high, pure, human. It came from the direction of the broken city, away from the river. Faint at first, then stronger. A simple tune. Maybe a folk song, maybe just random notes, but undeniably human. Played on something small, like a pocket whistle. It didn't fight the hum. It just existed alongside it. A small, defiant spark of ordinary life. The group froze, listening. The soldier's head snapped up. The woman stopped rocking, or her breath catching. Even the man with his face buried lifted his head slightly. The child blinked awake, staring toward the sound. The whistle played on. Steady, unafraid. It didn't sound hopeful. It sounded present. Like someone making tea in a broken kitchen. Like someone choosing to make a sound now, in this broken world, because it was what they knew how to do. The humming faltered. Just for a second. The pulsing light on the platform seemed to stutter. The line of calm walkers hesitated, a ripple of confusion passing through them. For the first time, some faces turned away from the platform, searching the ruins for the source of the sound. The soldier looked at the baker, eyes wide with something new, not just fear, but a flicker of possibility. "Others," he breathed. "There are others, fighting it." The baker nodded, a slow, a determined movement. They touched their apron pocket, feeling the sneaker, the photograph. "We're not the only ones holding on." The whistle stopped. Silence rushed back in, heavy with the returning hum. But the moment had passed. The spell was broken, just for a heartbeat. The group sat up a little straighter in the dark basement, shoulders squared, chins lifted, the ache in their chests, for lost homes, lost voices, lost ice cream cones, didn't vanish. But it felt different now. Not just a wound, a weapon, proof they were still human. The soldier stood up, not to walk toward the platform, but to move deeper into the shadows of the basement, searching for a better vantage point. "We watch," he said, his voice low but firm. "We learn. We find the whistle player." He looked at the group. "We remember the crumbs." The baker joined him, scanning the cracks for movement beyond the riverbank. The woman held the child close, humming the wordless tune again, but this time with a thread of something else woven through it. Not quite hope, but refusal. Refusal to become calm. Refusal to become empty. The pale dawn light grew stronger, washing the world in shades of ash and steel. The platforms pulsed relentlessly. Thum, thum, thum. The 12-hour window closed. The clock hit 0. Nothing happened. No beams, no new voice, no immediate neutralization. The platforms still glowed, the walkers still moved, the hum still vibrated the earth. But the Imperium's ultimatum had passed, and they were still here, still hiding, still feeling. It wasn't victory, it wasn't safety, it was something smaller, harder won, a reprieve, a chance. The baker looked down at their dusty hands, and then out at the broken city beyond the river. The whistle was gone, but its echo remained. A tiny crack in the Imperium's perfect, silent control. They thought of the warm ovens, the smell of yeast, the sound of a child's laugh near the bakery door. All gone. But the memory of the smell, the sound of the laugh, that was still here. Inside. An ember in the ashes. They pulled the tiny blue sneaker from their pocket. Not to mourn, to remember, to hold on to the shape of the loss. The ache wasn't the end. It was the beginning. The first note in a song they hadn't learned yet. The soldier lowered his empty rifle. He didn't need it to fight the platforms. He needed it to mark the path back to the whistle. To find the others holding on to their crumbs, their aches, their realness. As the weak sun climbed higher, casting long, cold shadows across the erased city, the group didn't move toward the river. They moved deeper into the ruins, away from the pulsing light, following not a plan, but a feeling. The feeling of rough bread crumbs in their palms. The feeling of a child's steady heartbeat. The feeling of a single, clear whistle cutting through the silence. They walked into the broken dawn, not as soldiers, not as victims, but as witnesses, carrying the weight of the missing billions not as a crushing burden, but as a quiet promise. We remember. We feel. We are still here. The hum followed them, a constant threat. But so did the echo of the whistle. And in that echo, fragile as a spider's thread, was the first trembling note of a different future. One built not on silence, but on the messy, painful, beautiful sound of being human. 1,199 words.